chosen one, look around. You feel that? That shift in the air? That's not just energy, that's you. You've been carrying a weight most people couldn't even name, walking through fires they pretended not to see, holding your ground when everyone else scattered. And yet, here you are, still standing, still undeniable, still you. This isn't just another moment. This is your moment, the one you were built for, the one they never thought you'd survive long enough to see. You're not here by accident, and you're definitely not here to play small. You are the proof that light doesn't ask permission to shine. That truth doesn't need a majority vote to stand tall. So welcome, anointed ones. The ones who didn't fold when it got dark. The ones who didn't shrink when the crowd went quiet. You've been underestimated, misunderstood, and even mocked, but all of it was just training for right now. This is your stage, your roar, your time to remind the world exactly who you are and why you were sent here. So stand up, straighten your crown, and step forward like the ground was waiting for you to walk on it. Because it was, looking for purpose and peace. Hit subscribe and start the journey. It became clear eventually that the disturbance was never a threat, but a kind of quiet signal. Impossible to ignore, once noticed. Not an adversary, not a storm, not an intruder. Simply a presence that peeled back the layers others worked so hard to keep intact. There was no need for confrontation or accusation. Simply existing with depth, with a kind of unshakable clarity, was enough to unsettle. That presence revealed cracks in what they thought was solid, showing them the hollowness of their politeness, the fractures in their self-image, the brittle shells of their confidence. And because they couldn't bear the weight of what they glimpsed, they tried to name it something else. Excessive, fragile, volatile. Labels that served more to protect them from what they were seeing than to describe what was in front of them. It touched something buried deep, something they had long avoided. Without uttering a word, it dismantled false assurances and exposed manipulation just by refusing to participate. For a while, the illusion that this presence was the source of disruption persisted, because it spared them from looking closer at themselves. But the passing of time has its way of unraveling convenient stories. Slowly, one by one, those who dismissed it began to say, softly at first, "It makes sense now." Or, "I didn't understand then, but I see differently today." It's not just about vindication. It's about recognition of the role they played in rejecting what was meant to help them grow. It's about realizing that what once felt like a rupture was actually a catalyst. They may never fully comprehend how much strength it took to remain whole in the face of their confusion. But what's undeniable now is that the story has changed. What they once feared, they now understand, was a necessary reflection. Step beyond the screen. Join and help light the way for others. Those who stood nearby and watched are now restless, caught in the memory of their own hesitation. They witnessed enough to feel the imbalance, enough to sense something unjust unfolding in front of them. But still, they did nothing. Choosing ease over bravery, they clung to the sidelines and told themselves it was not their place. That silence felt like safety then, but now it echoes louder than any accusations ever spoken. They thought they were keeping peace when really, they allowed harm to deepen unchallenged. While isolation and betrayal closed in on someone before their eyes, they folded into quietness, convincing themselves that detachment absolved them. But time, unrelenting, brought everything into sharper focus. Now that same quiet has become heavy, full of restless nights and unwelcome recollections. They remember the glances exchanged, the unspoken pleas they ignored, the countless opportunities to step forward that they let slip away. And it stings more now that they realize the one they watched endure was not weak, not flawed, but steady enough to carry what none of them dared to touch. They are not haunted because that person fell. They are haunted because that person rose. Despite the silence, despite the abandonment, despite the weight, still standing, not as a casualty, but as a quiet force that proved truth doesn't need applause to endure. Now some come forward, tentatively offering words or support. Others remain hidden, ashamed of their own inaction. But the cost of that silence is undeniable, and they feel it now, knowing they failed not just another, but their own measure of decency. That realization will linger long after the whispers have faded. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. What was mistaken for collapse turned out to be a silent rebirth. Distance became the soil where resilience took root. They imagined the absence of others would dismantle everything, leaving nothing but a fragile shell. Yet solitude became a forge, burning away the unnecessary, sculpting something entirely unexpected. At first, the quiet felt suffocating, each unanswered question folding inwards, each doubt echoing louder than reason. Guilt crept in, rewriting the past with false blame. But as the days stretched on, something subtle, yet profound, began to awaken. In the stillness, the haze of confusion dissolved. What once felt like exile revealed itself as sanctuary, a place to reclaim what was long forgotten under the weight of performance and pretense. Those who walked away believed they were subtracting, but they unknowingly cleared the room for truth to enter. And while they misread the silence as surrender, beneath it all, a quiet architecture was being built. Foundations strong enough to outlast their judgments. When the curtain eventually lifted, what stood there wasn't broken, but unshakable, and the onlookers could finally see their own haste to abandon what they didn't understand. That separation had exposed their inability to stay and simultaneously illuminated a strength they never expected to witness. What they thought was the end became a beginning they couldn't deny. Ridicule arrived in waves, loud and performative, each accusation more elaborate than the last. They turned someone's pain into theater, convinced that their chorus of laughter could drown out the truth. Their stories spread fast, carefully crafted to sound convincing enough to eclipse any defense. And yet, beneath the noise, a quiet strategy unfolded. Not out of fear, but out of a deeper knowing that the moment to speak would come on its own. No effort was made to rush the process. The evidence of what really happened wasn't manufactured. It was waiting, accumulating quietly while they paraded their false versions of events. Every word, every gesture, every betrayal was noted somewhere beyond their sight, not stored as a weapon, but as a record no one could erase. The revelation didn't arrive as vengeance, but as an unexpected unveiling, at first subtle, then impossible to ignore. It came as confirmations no one could explain away, unlikely allies coming forward, fragments of proof surfacing where none was sought, a sudden shift in perspective, even among those who once doubted. The timing, impossibly precise, left no room to dismiss. What startled them wasn't just the reality itself, but how effortlessly it unspooled, how deliberate and untouchable the unfolding appeared. And when the tide finally turned, it wasn't the person they mocked who had changed. It was the clarity of the truth that now stood in stark contrast to their lies. The same stage they used to humiliate became the place where they were confronted by what they thought would stay buried forever. What seemed obvious at first turned out to be an illusion everyone was too eager to believe. The focus stayed fixed on a single figure, dissected and blamed, with assumptions flying like sparks from dry stone. People dismissed their own doubts, convincing themselves the narrative was simple, that the accused just couldn't handle scrutiny. Yet the story everyone ignored was the one buried at the very start, the quiet steps of betrayal cloaked in ceremony and false gentleness. The real conflict began, not with a reaction, but with calculated moves, hiding behind polite gestures and carefully rehearsed lines. The ones orchestrating the harm spoke softly in public while weaving confusion in private. They dressed their intentions in respectability, blending seamlessly into the crowd, making whispers sound like concern and manipulation appear as guidance. Because their posture seemed proper and their words so polished, the audience believed them without question. But truth, even when suppressed, has a way of rising from the cracks. And now the question no one dared to ask has become impossible to ignore. Where did it actually begin? The very hands that claimed to help were exposed as the ones pulling strings, spreading doubts and steering others into judgment. The revelation came not just from realizing stones were thrown, but from discovering who was hiding in the shadows, tossing them. Those who appeared unshakable, who spoke most of kindness and patience, who posed as healers while deepening wounds, are now unmasked. The crowd has shifted its gaze, no longer fooled by appearances, demanding clarity rather than quiet compromise. What's left now is no longer about smoothing things over. It is about exposing the roots. And for the first time, the collective sees that the one they called the problem was the target all along, while the ones striking from behind now stand under their own spotlight of accountability. Step beyond the screen, join, and help light the way for others. There was no shouting, no spectacle, no desperate attempt to persuade. The words landed softly, steady, and unadorned, yet they carried more weight than the noise surrounding them. The quietness was mistaken for surrender, the measured tone for uncertainty. And so they dismissed the message, thinking loudness equaled strength and composure meant guilt. But truth is patient. It does not demand to be heard. It waits until reality aligns with its shape. While others scrambled to win attention and manufacture allies, the calm voice simply stayed consistent, letting time do what argument could not. No one rushed to believe, but the days and weeks began to paint a different picture, with events unfolding like pages written long ago. Each warning, once brushed off, started echoing in real life, not as vague coincidence, but as direct, undeniable fact. Conversations replayed in memory, actions revealed their hidden intent, and even those who doubted began to piece it together. What was once ridiculed as overthinking began to look more like insight. What had been dismissed as paranoia now struck them as accuracy. That shift didn't happen because anyone demanded it. It happened because evidence quietly accumulated, matching the words that were once ignored. And the change in the crowd was unmistakable. Even the most skeptical had to pause as reality closed the gap, leaving no room to deny what stood before them. The outcome spoke for itself, not through volume or force, but through unshakable clarity. The quiet voice prevailed because it was rooted in truth, not in the need to dominate. And now even those who once turned away find themselves admitting that strength had never been in the shouting. It was always in the unwavering certainty of what was right, and that certainty finally became impossible to overlook. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. What unfolded was never just an isolated hardship, but an intricate message disguised as experience. At first, it felt punishing, confusing, like you'd been singled out for no reason. Every step forward seemed to trigger more loss, more silence, more cold shoulders from familiar faces. Those who claimed to stand with you vanished or turned sharp when you needed them most. It all seemed random, senseless. But what was invisible then is evident now. Your journey carried more than pain. It carried instructions for others. Those long nights of doubt became a kind of manual written through endurance. The betrayals, the isolation, the quiet resistance you learned to hold, they were not pointless trials, but a map for those just now entering the same labyrinth. The same shadows you once wrestled alone are now falling over others, but they are not as lost because they remember watching you navigate. The patterns they now encounter, the smiling malice, the hollow rituals, the subtle control, were written into your story first. And your persistence, your refusal to let go of yourself, even when they tried to erase you, is now their reference point. The scars you carry became signposts for them, showing where the ground is weak, where the traps are hidden. What once felt like you being left behind has revealed itself as you being sent ahead to clear the way. This is why they return to your example, not because it's just inspiring, but because it teaches them how to stand when everything conspires to crush. What you endured out loud gave language to their quiet battles. What seemed like rejection was preparation. And now, as they walk a road you once walked alone, they see that your story was never just about survival. It was about decoding what would otherwise destroy. And now they follow, not just to honor what you carried, but because you lit the path they now walk. At first, it was easy for them to dismiss. They stood at a distance, watching you unravel, certain you were overreacting, convinced you were imagining enemies where there were none. You spoke of unseen harm, quiet betrayals, invisible manipulations, things they didn't feel, so they refused to believe. They told themselves you were fragile, dramatic, mistaken. But time has a way of teaching differently. Now they find themselves standing in the very place you stood, feeling the same weight pressed down, seeing the same cracks in the ground. The tactics that once seemed unthinkable to them are now at their door. And suddenly, the things they mocked sound like warnings they should have heard. What you endured before them is now echoing in their lives, and the clarity you carried becomes undeniable. The same cruelty disguised as care, the same pressure to silence yourself, the same isolation that nearly undid you. These are now theirs to confront. But because you went first, they don't face it blindly. They remember how you stayed upright through it, how you refused to become bitter, how you held boundaries without apology, and how you kept your identity intact when everything tried to erase it. That is why they walk differently now, not with pity, but with understanding. Not just for you, but for themselves. Your quiet defiance taught them what survival really looks like. Now they move alongside you, not out of sympathy, but out of recognition, because they finally understand that what broke you open is what shaped their own awakening. And as they march beside you, they carry the truth you carried all along. You were never fragile. You were simply the first to face what they now cannot ignore. What looked like surrender was really strategy in motion. They expected a crack, a slip, a misstep they could hold up as proof of what they'd been saying all along. They tried to corner you, hoping frustration would push you into their trap, that anger would stain your story and make it easier for them to point and say, "See?" But the reaction they were counting on never came. Instead, you stayed still, deliberately. Every provocation fell into quiet, and every silence sharpened their discomfort. What they failed to notice was that the quiet wasn't defeat, it was precision. Each word withheld, each glance measured, was a quiet ledger filling with everything they thought they'd gotten away with. While they broadcast their version, you were assembling the pieces without fanfare. Your composure didn't mean you accepted what they did. It meant you were letting their own words and actions collect into something undeniable. The more they performed, the more tangled they became. And when the moment arrived, it wasn't you who uncovered the truth. It was their own behavior collapsing in plain sight. The contradictions they thought no one noticed now stand exposed, and the restraint they once mocked has become the very thing that condemns them. The silence they mistook for weakness now roars louder than their accusations ever did. They wanted you loud so they could twist your volume into guilt. You gave them quiet, and it became their undoing. The stillness has spoken, not as surrender, but as a record, revealing not just what they did, but who they are. Rebuilding didn't begin with applause, and it wasn't meant to impress anyone. The long nights, the invisible labor of piecing yourself together, happened away from curious eyes. Nobody stood nearby to cheer you on when it hurt, and nobody handed you recognition when it was done. While they were distracted by polished performances from others, you worked quietly, not for validation, but because survival left you no alternative. Grief was swallowed in silence. Forgiveness wrestled with in empty rooms, and the fragments of who you were became a foundation for someone stronger. All of it happened without spectacle, no audience, no permission. And while they overlooked you, underestimated you, even ridiculed your quiet recovery, you kept moving, shaping something they couldn't see coming. But now the atmosphere has shifted. Those who once passed you by without a thought can no longer ignore the force you've become. It's not that you're shouting now, it's that your very presence makes noise on its own. The confidence, the calm, the depth, they speak for you. Those who thought they knew your limits now watch, startled, as you move beyond them without bitterness or fanfare. You don't need their recognition, and you never did. But now that it arrives, it does so uninvited, carrying a weight they can't explain. The same people who doubted you are now citing your story, following your example, trying to understand how you endured without hardening. They see now that you never craved their approval. That is what makes them stop. Because what you built, out of sight, against the odds, has become impossible to dismiss. And what they thought was an ending was really just the beginning of something they can only stand back and learn from. What they observed as chaos was really a lesson unfolding before their eyes. While your world unraveled, they stood by, not to help, but to watch. Some with quiet amusement, some with veiled disdain, others pretending neutrality while taking mental notes. Your struggle became their unspoken classroom. They scrutinized your missteps, whispered about your hardship, and waited for the inevitable collapse they assumed was coming. But what none of them expected was how deliberately you rebuilt. Not in grand cinematic gestures, but in deliberate, grounded choices. Piece by piece, you shaped yourself without asking for recognition, teaching by example, even when no one seemed to care. They noticed how you turned disappointment into determination, how you faced betrayal with dignity, how you learned to move without bitterness. At first, they pretended it was nothing, but quietly, they began to borrow from what they'd seen. They mirrored the language you used to steady yourself. They mimicked the mindset you cultivated under pressure. They adapted your resilience as if it were their own invention. The very framework they once dismissed became the scaffolding for their own progress. Without ever saying it, they enrolled themselves in your journey and absorbed everything you demonstrated. They disguised it as coincidence, as if they came to these realizations alone. But beneath the surface, they know the truth, that their growth carries the imprint of the struggle they once watched unfold like an evening show. Whether they voice it or not, they understand what they owe. Not because you demanded acknowledgement, but because every victory they now enjoy rests quietly on the foundation you laid without applause. What they assumed would erase you instead anchored you more firmly than they could comprehend. They closed doors, erased your name from conversations, and moved as though your absence would confirm their victory. From their vantage point, it looked like you had vanished, like silence and solitude would swallow you whole. But what they never considered was that while they moved forward, assuming they'd buried you, you were beneath their notice, transforming in ways they couldn't measure. Every slight became fuel. Every dismissal carved deeper understanding, and every quiet moment away from their scrutiny became an opportunity to become unshakable in ways they never imagined. What seemed like invisibility was a process of strengthening far beyond their reach. They mocked what they thought was your decline while you were building depth they would one day depend on. What they believed was the end was simply your preparation. And now, as the evidence of your endurance begins to show, they can't reconcile how what they tried to dismantle has become immovable. You didn't emerge seeking to settle scores. You returned composed, unwavering, and impossible to ignore. The weight you carry now steadies not only you, but those around you, and those who tried to undo you can't help but see that their attempts failed entirely.